Well, heading overseas now, the United States has delivered an ultimatum to Russia. Stop the Syrian regime's bombing campaign in Aleppo, or the US will suspend contact with Moscow. The UN Secretary-General has described the latest situation in Aleppo as, quote, worse than a slaughterhouse. Since yesterday, 2 of Aleppo's main hospitals have been bombed, as Anne Barker reports.
At first glance, the dusty grey rubble looks like any other bombed building in Aleppo. Crumbled walls, collapsed roofs and plaster pulverised into powder. But this time the target was one of Aleppo's biggest hospitals, M10. It's one of 2 more hospitals now unable to function after being bombed. Barrel bombs struck here at 4 a.m, says the man filming the devastation. This is where they landed, a total targeting. He points to damaged cylinders and fuel tanks lying around. Here are the oxygen cylinders, he says. They're not functioning anymore. Here are generators, a diesel engine for electricity. Inside the hospital, in intensive care, patients still lie in their beds. The beep of a respirator indicates the oxygen is gone. Doctors and human rights groups say this latest bombing yesterday morning killed 7 people, including customers at a nearby bakery. Dr. Abderrahman Alomar from the Syrian American Medical Society, speaking from Geneva, says it's unclear when the M10 hospital can reopen.
M10 is the biggest trauma hospital in eastern Aleppo city, and those 2 hospitals are 2 of the only 3 trauma hospitals in Aleppo city.
The latest attacks have drawn the strongest condemnation, including from the United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who says the situation in Aleppo is worse than a slaughterhouse.
Those using ever more destructive weapons know exactly what they are doing. They know they are committing war crimes. Imagine the destruction. People with their limbs blown off, children in a terrible pain with no relief, infected, suffering, dying, with nowhere to go and no end in sight. Imagine a slaughterhouse. This is worse.
It's unclear who exactly carried out these bombings, Syria or Russia, but the US Secretary of State John Kerry has delivered a scathing attack on Moscow for its role in supporting the bombing campaign. In a phone call to Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he threatened to cut all contact with Moscow on Syria unless it stops the Assad regime's assault on Aleppo. A State Department spokesman, John Kirby.
We're perfectly willing and able to move forward on those kinds of steps that would end up in the suspension of U.S.-Russia bilateral engagement on Syria, unless we see some significant steps taken by Russia in the very near future.
In response, the Kremlin delivered its own ultimatum, demanding an end to what it says is the trend of blaming Russia for attacks in Syria. Russia's ambassador to the UN is Evgeny Zaganov. He says it's become an unfortunate tradition that the majority of strikes on civilian facilities in Syria without checking is blamed on Damascus or Russia. Nevertheless, the Russian Defense Ministry says it's ready to continue working with the US to address the Syrian issue, and it's sending diplomats to Geneva for talks on normalising the situation in Aleppo.
Anne Barker reporting.